on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show Overtime.
Welcome to another edition of the Rita Panahi Show Overtime. Coming up today, we'll look at the deplorable response to the Hawaii wildfires where far-left ideology hampered efforts to save lives. I'll be speaking to Josh Hammer about that and much more. Also joining me today is our favourite Texan, the incorrigible Alex Stein. And we've got some serious matters to cover, including the illegal immigration crisis on the southern border and the number of criminals crossing into America. Kinsey Schofield will tell us the latest royal news, including a brouhaha over Meghan being spotted around California without her wedding ring. And as always, we'll bring you the biggest news stories from around the world and a massive, huge edition of Lefties Losing It. Let's jump right into it. Joining me now is Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, let's start in London, where the UK Telegraph reports Mayor Sadiq Khan's office allegedly tried to silence scientists who questioned the effectiveness of his ultra-low emission zone policy. The scientists claimed that Sadiq Khan's climate policy actually had little impact on pollution levels. Next week, this controversial ULEZ zone, where motorists must pay a daily fee if their vehicle doesn't meet emission standards, it's going to get expanded. And it's a policy, Kosha, that is hugely unpopular. We're hearing about more than 300 cameras installed for the scheme being vandalised or stolen, according to the BBC. This policy seems very regressive to me. It's going to punish those who can least afford it.
Mm-hmm. And I think evidence is sort of an old-fashioned, quaint idea now. Who needs evidence when you can just steamroll things through? You know, I think there's two contradictory dynamics at play here. One is there's a generational cost of living crisis, and particularly energy prices are a big component of that. And in the middle of that, you have this relentless pursuit of government intervention in the name of climate change. So it's not just about saving the planet or conserving resources, which most people in principle can get behind, but it's about government intervention in it, to the point that it trickles down to those very people, as you mentioned, that are being hurt. You're going to see that pressure cooker environment snap from time to time. And I think, you know, the vandalism, while nobody can condone it, of the cameras, it's an obvious sort of manifestation of why that's happening. And I think we'll just see more of that because people aren't going to stand by.
And we keep being told, trust the science, but if scientists counter the narrative, well, they're just ignored or slandered as quacks. It seems to be a very bizarre version of science where you actually pretend it's all settled, there's no argument, there's no disputing of the evidence or the testing of the evidence. Staying with the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan's office is also under fire for what looks like blatant racism. Khan's website features a picture of a young white family with a note that they don't represent real Londoners. Mr. Khan is saying now that the caption was added by a staff member in error and does not reflect his view or the view of the Greater London Authority. I mean, I don't know how this happens. And can you imagine the reaction if it was a black family and there was a caption someone in the office had put that, you know, that these people don't represent real Londoners? It really does feed into this narrative that there is an anti-white sentiment in parts of the West that's growing. And it's the one race where you can be openly racist against them without any repercussions.
Seems to be so. And I love how it's always some staffer, some unnamed promoter, some unnamed staffer that gets thrown under the bus. But who is that person? You know, what accountability was there? Who knows? The cynical view could be that it's maybe a trial balloon, sometimes these things, and you want to put stuff out there actually and see how much narrative has shifted, how much blowback you're actually going to get, or it's just sloppiness and probably too many people working in a government bureaucracy who have too much time on their hands.
While we're on race relations, the race baiters cannot help but inject race into every topic, even the Women's Soccer World Cup, where England made the final, lost to Spain. Here is reaction from Sky News UK. That's UK, not Sky News Australia. No, no, no.
What jumps out of you is that this doesn't sort of represent diverse Britain. It's all these blonde, blue-eyed girls, and, you know, I wish them well, but I do think we need to ask ourselves questions about why is it that we've got, it has a lack of diversity. You need some sort of representation there to say, whatever background you come from, you could get to this sort of level.
Because it's
Britain
important,
doesn't look like that.
Yeah, and it's so important when you speak to these little girls that they see someone that they can relate to.
Exactly. It makes such a difference. That little girl might then end up playing football because she's seen someone who looks like her.
But it doesn't detract
It's
from what
fashionable
they've
to knock men, but if this was a man, it would be...
Kosha, there's so much to unpack here, including the absurdity of suggesting black athletes are underrepresented at the elite level. I mean, that is just as someone who's never watched sport anywhere. But what's your reaction to that?
I think, you know, it's really intellectually lazy or maybe even intellectually dishonest, because they try to frame everything in moralistic terms, and little girls from all backgrounds want to look up and see themselves and the possibilities. Everybody agrees with that sentiment, but then they misapply it in this context. It doesn't make sense, and they know better. It would have been great if one of those journalists had asked a simple follow-up question: what do you think about the NBA? Is it representative enough? Because it's in the reverse, and you never see that.
Or the English athletics team. You know, have a look at the English athletics team and see the racial diversity there. I mean, do they ever say, oh, why aren't there more whites in the track team? I mean, because the best people are selected. It's a merit-based system. There's no affirmative action in elite sport.
Should
yet.
Here we are. And it's your point from earlier, Rita, that it's only one way. The diversity call-outs are always ever only one way. It's never the other way.
Absolutely. Let's give the final word on this issue to broadcaster Rafe Mandel-Hayko, who tweeted, England is 4.2% black. 13% of the Lionesses are black. So that's 3 players on the 23-strong squad. That's 3 times more than the wider population. People like Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, that was a gentleman we heard from, are so immersed in identity politics and their own self-created ethnicity bubbles that they are completely cut off from reality. Hard to imagine him calling out the British athletics team for being too black. For such people, more diversity no longer means equal representation. We must stop being afraid to expose this nonsense and call it out for what it is. Well said, sir. That was summed it up beautifully. Now let's go to the US, and a former anchor at sports channel ESPN has spoken out about the hypocrisy she experienced at that network. Sage Steele was forced to apologise after an incident in which she claims she was simply expressing her opinions on air, or political opinions, something that happens a lot at ESPN. You can't turn on that station without having leftist political messaging shoved down your throat. But Sage was sacked. Interesting case there, Kosha.
It was a very interesting case study because, as you say, ESPN is very political, and there's a whole montage of their anchors coming out of the sports lane and weighing in on all sorts of topics, from Roe v. Wade to Black Lives Matter. She took the view you're not supposed to take on vaccines, interestingly, and the other one was on her mixed race background, because she's half white and half black, and the way she said that, I think, was not well received. But there was a little mistake that they made where she's based in Connecticut, and ESPN is headquartered in Connecticut, and Connecticut actually has an extra protection of laws that bars employers from firing employees for free speech violations, and so she kind of got lucky, I think, by living in that state. And I think a lot of GOP senators are looking at this, or legislators, I should say, at the state level, to see if similar protections in this era of cancel culture should be brought in all states. And so we'll see what happens.
Interesting. It'll be interesting to see where she ends up, because, we may not find out how much she got, but you can't keep these sort of secrets for long. And if it was a substantial sum, I think we'll find out some details there. Now let's go to the world of academia. And at Open University, a law lecturer has been sacked because she raised concerns about teaching gender identity theory. Almut Gatto questioned curriculum requirements that force teachers to talk about gender diverse identities and encourage students to use offenders' preferred pronouns. This doesn't say much about academic freedom, Kosha.
It doesn't. It's one of these big establishment institutions, and it's just such a deep system. It's really, really hard to go against the grain, and we've seen that time and again in issue after issue. Sometimes you see a crack where somebody comes out of it, and then they'll be beaten back promptly. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it is interesting when you see more of these cracks form, and I think it's just a pushback on this establishment that has really seen a lot of scope creep, and they're just moving away and away from actually teaching the subject matter that they have to do, and everything's going into these social issues. People don't want it.
Well, I think one of the matters she raised is actually hugely important and being missed, and that's something that's important to victims of crime. Gatto said we should not allow an offender to dictate the language of his case in a way which masks relevant facts, adding that she felt the new requirements distorted equality law and normalised child sexual exploitation. And we are seeing cases, Kosha, before the courts where everyone is dutifully respecting the preferred pronouns of the offender, sex offenders in some cases, making a mockery of the English language, and more importantly, traumatising the victims. The victims are required to talk about her penis or just twisting reality. So I think the matter raised there is hugely relevant.
And in the case of victims, that's where it's just beyond the pale for most people, where it's completely backwards, that the perpetrator is the one who's being accommodated at the expense of the victim. It makes no sense. And also the other issue too, I think people are very quick to concede language. They're just like, okay, who cares? It's just a word. It doesn't matter. But it does. It's a gateway into entire arguments that follow from that. And I think that's kind of the issue why there's this pushback on language, and you're going to see more of that as people stand up to this.
Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Now, we're going to talk more about Oliver Anthony and the reaction to his song later, but here is YouTube music critic Anthony Fantano finding racism and problematic geographical themes in the lyrics. Just another lefty losing it.
He's drawing a geographical line here as well between North and South, using Richmond, Virginia as that dividing line. With that, you can't ignore the elephant in the room. You know, he's like bringing up old, bitter North-South ideological disconnections that go back to the Civil War era. Drawing this North-South line and claiming that, you know, it's those people from the North that want to control us and tell us what to do. There's a lot of really bad and toxic and often bigoted political baggage that comes with, you know, that North v South binary.
Kosha, there's something toxic, but I don't know if it's Oliver Anthony's song.
Indeed, I think that was, he's sort of all over the place and reaching intellectually to try and tie it to history.
He's also an economist, apparently, because he also gives us some economic commentary there, which is, you know...
It was all over the place. It was a little bit hard to follow, but here's the bottom line, I think, for this. This song has tapped into something that there's obviously a deep dissatisfaction on many levels in the country, and you see that manifesting in different ways, whether it's the rise of a candidate like Trump that was very controversial, but he was a manifestation of that dissatisfaction in the country, or in the musical arena, these songs debuting at #1, I think it was 37% of all music downloads in the last week is this song. So he's tapping into something. And the reason why Richmond and the geography, as this YouTuber was getting at, is important is because it is one of those states that's very rural. There's a rural divide, and then there's the urban divide of basically the DC glitterati set living there. And that's kind of what he's talking about, the ruling class and the rural class. Everybody gets it.
Well, that's
it's not that hard.
It's actually, that is very obvious, and yet it seems to go completely over this critic's head, who's obviously thought about this long and hard, but that very obvious point that speaks to so many people seems to be completely lost on him. It's not just Oliver Anthony triggering the lefties. Before him, Jason Aldean's song, Try That in a Small Town, was triggering the hysterical and hateful left, and it still is.
The Jason Aldean song, Try That in a Small Town, is really bad. But anyway, if you're a white person and you identify with it and you want to defend it and be vocal about the fact that you like it and you understand it, and in the face of black people telling you that the song is racist and the video is incredibly racist, you want to scream that it's not racist. Whether a song is racist or not, that makes you inherently racist.
I mean, these people are completely, well, the left is losing it. That's why they're in the segment. But it's also interesting that we're having this golden run for country music at the moment in the US. A couple of weeks ago, the top 3 songs were all country songs. I think it's the first time that's ever happened. And Jason Aldean was #1. And of course, Oliver Anthony with a song that he wrote in front of his caravan he lives in, having millions of downloads and, like you said, #1 on the Apple charts.
Yeah, and I think, country music in general tends to have an audience that leans a particular way, and you just see this complete divergence from the rest of the music industry that's gone very much the other way. And then within that, these upstarts are tapping into something that's real and deep, and people have a yearning for more content, whether it's entertainment content, musical content, news content that speaks to their problems. They're tapping into that. I think it's actually a very interesting story for independent artists too, that these people coming out of nowhere, and you can create a song, put it on the internet, and become an overnight success is actually a fascinating part of the story also.
Absolutely. Now here is a woman having what appears to be a meltdown, which she helpfully filmed and put on the internet for us. And it's all over what seems like a rather unremarkable interaction with a man.
Women do not want to be spoken to in public by strange men. I was just leaving the hardware store because I'm a construction girl, and I was deciding whether or not to jaywalk, and I was waiting patiently to see if there was a moment when there was going to be a clear, safe path for me. And this man in a minivan, I'm locking my car doors, this man in a minivan slows down and starts waving at me and yelling, "Go!" And I was like, "No, there's cars coming, not safe." And he goes, "Go!" And I was like, "No, you drive, like you're endangering people."
Calm down, love. You're going to hurt yourself. I mean, these girls, they go on the internet and have these meltdowns over the most mundane interactions. I mean, imagine if you actually had a crisis to face, what would happen? Now, you know how you can stump the left and make them lose it? By asking them the simplest questions like, what is a woman? Watch this woman confidently explain that people can't identify as a different race because of genetics, but science doesn't apply when talking about gender.
Can you identify as a black person?
No.
Why?
Because I'm not black.
I'm not a woman, but I can identify as a woman according to you.
If you transition, maybe.
What defines a transition?
Like, if that's your goal,
If you believe it.
Sure.
If you believe you're black, why aren't you black?
Well, that's just not, that's like genetics. That's like ancestry. Like, you're black, right?
You're also born a man or a woman. It's the same thing. That's also genetics.
Okay, I'm over it.
She's over it. I bet you are, love. Let's now watch a clip of a tolerant, law-abiding lefty burning a Trump 1 sign. First he kicks the sign, then he comes back in the dead of night to burn it. He's still in his bike gear, kosher. Was he just cycling around all day waiting for darkness to fall before doing that? Good news, that lefty losing it has been caught. There was a reward offered after that footage went viral, and he's been arrested in North Carolina. But it just shows you these lefties cannot cope with any sort of dissenting view. And it's something I noticed in the 2020 election when we were covering it in the States. You'd go to red cities where there were Trump signs everywhere, And you would see Biden signs and they weren't vandalised, the houses didn't have their windows smashed, people tolerated it. But when you were in the blue cities with the Biden signs everywhere, you saw not a single Trump sign because you knew what was going to happen. They were going to be vandalised. So it does seem to be that we've allowed one side to behave in this lawless manner. When they see a sign they don't like, they feel it's their rightful duty to destroy it.
There is a growing belief in the U.S. right now of this two-tier justice system, and we always talk about it at the high levels of one side being indicted and criminalized and not the other. It trickles down even to something as simple as signs and trespassing and vandalism, I think, as you noted. And there's that saying that Trump in particular lives rent-free in people's minds. So clearly we're in 2023, it's way over, and the guy had a lot of time on his hands still in his bike gear, as you mentioned, coming hours later to finish the job.
Yes, he did try to kick that sign down, but it was built in a very sturdy fashion because it stood up until he burned it down. Now, we've got more wisdom from CNN. We love that. Apparently, pronouns are so 2022. We're all about neo-pronouns, and CNN wants to educate the great unwashed about the importance of pronouns or neopronouns. They write, neopronouns are used by non-binary, transgender and gender non-conforming people because they offer more freedom of identity. Per the LGBTQ advocacy group, the Human Rights Campaign, neopronouns are a step towards a society where people can more fully express all parts of themselves. Then they give us some examples, Kosha. They're very helpful. They say pronouns like fae, fair. They're commonly pronounced fae, fair. And they give an example of how you can use it. You say, Faye told me that Faye's best friend is in town this week. Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? But if you were diligently watching the Rita Panahi Show, including the Overtime edition on Tuesdays, well, you would have already known all about neopronouns. We've already educated you on this madness. Remember this?
But why would a person want to use force pronouns? For example, a person who has been struggling with gender lately. This person has already tried using he, ze, it pronouns, but still doesn't feel right using those. So this person wants to try neo-pronouns that relate to nature. Therefore, force pronouns could feel relatable, especially because this person feels a strong relationship with nature. But anyway, here's how to use force pronouns in sentences. Spore is such a wonderful person. Spore's smile is so contagious. In fact, I saw Spore make a whole audience smile. I think Spore should be very proud of Spore's self. Oh my goodness, we made it through!
Try to keep up, CNN. We were teaching people how to use neopronouns back when you were pretending BLM rights were mostly peaceful. I mean, we've brought you all these neopronouns, but it is absurd, Kosha, because we're literally now talking about hundreds, if not thousands, because you could identify as anything. There was Spore, fae, it could be an object, it could be something out of nature. And again, there's this requirement that if you are to be fully inclusive, you have to pander to this delusion.
And it makes no sense at all. If only they channeled all that energy into learning an actual language. Maybe learn Latin, they'd be ahead by now instead of inventing a new one that no one can keep up with. And another quick point I would make too is that article probably cost over $100,000 in terms of all costs. When you just look at the journalist's salary and the editorial and everything that it takes to do that, that's the kind of stuff they're putting out instead of real stories that people would love to read instead.
And the way it was promoted, there was really no one saying, wait a second, is this advisable? Is it good for society? Should we be entertaining it? No, it's all just a step in the right direction. Joining me now is the Senior Editor-at-Large at Newsweek, Josh Hammer. Josh, former Virginia factory worker Anthony Oliver has become an overnight sensation with his heartfelt song, Rich Men North of Richmond. It went viral around 2 weeks ago and has hit now #1 on Apple Music's Top 100 charts, ahead of the likes of Taylor Swift. But we do have the usual suspects slamming it as populist right-wing. They've said it's bigoted and divisive. No doubt, perhaps because many Republicans, many pro-Trump folk seem to like the song. Let's have a look at the ordinary Americans from all types of backgrounds reacting to this song.
I wish politicians would look out for minors, and not just minors on an island somewhere. Lord, we got folks in the street, ain't got nothing to eat, and the whole beast milking welfare. Well, God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, 'cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down. Lord, it's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me. What? For people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is. Living in the new world.
Josh, you've got people reduced to tears hearing that song, and then you've got, and I'm going to be quoting some later in the program, music critics and other assorted commentariats saying that this is some sort of a divisive right-wing anthem.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what is supposed to be divisive about this, Rita. You know, it's actually not just liberals. It's actually even some establishment Republican magazines and affiliated organizations. I mean, National Review magazine, kind of the flagship of American conservatism in the pre-Trump era, you know, even they published a blog post from Mark Antonio Wright just condemning this song. I mean, what would make someone want to condemn this? I mean, I just don't really understand it myself. And Rita, by the way, I'm actually a huge country music fan, so it's very nice to see country music kind of rise to the top of global attention. It's actually kind of the second country music song in a matter of months that's kind of went viral on political grounds. We had Jason Aldean's song "Try That" in a small town, and now we have Oliver Anthony kind of with this chart-topping hit. I mean, it's just unambiguously heartfelt, right? I mean, that is why people are being reduced to tears here. He's talking about a new world. And in this new world, Rita, I think that you have multiple forms of newer tyranny. So the tyrannies of the 20th century, the tyrannies of much of human history have been totalitarian governments, communism, Nazism, Islamism, and threats like that. But in the new 21st century, tyranny can take many different forms. And I think that really is what this song is speaking to. It's speaking to economic tyranny, the tyranny of the rich men north of Richmond who would sell out their fellow countrymen, who would ship jobs overseas, things like that, just to earn a quick buck or try to top the next quarterly return on the S&P 500 or something like that. It's also speaking to kind of a spiritual tyranny, kind of a lack of spiritual meaning, which unfortunately the bipartisan liberal order elites of both parties have been all too quick over the decades to abet spiritual decline in America, not supporting churches, synagogues, institutions of religion in general in America. So it really has become a cultural touchstone, a cultural rallying cry. And, you know, I, for one, look forward to what Oliver Anthony can do next.
Well, it's interesting because he said that he has now been offered millions of dollars now that he's had this enormous success, but he doesn't want that. He doesn't want to have an enormous crew around him and be travelling the countryside with a huge entourage performing. He said he's writing these songs because they're from the heart, because he's depressed, and that's where it's coming from. So it really is so authentic, and I think that's what speaks to so many people. Now, Josh, you and I have spoken about soft on crime DAs in blue cities a number of times. This story from New York really shows why so many are fleeing these Democrat strongholds for red cities. The New York Post reports a crazed man with a history of assaulting NYC workers bit a police officer's ear, leaving him needing 20 stitches, and then he was released without bail. A police source revealed that the 32-year-old Dante Bynon had been arrested 6 times before, including 3 violent incidents. There's been incidents against law enforcement officers before, Josh, and yet he's released. I mean, what is going on in places like New York? How can these citizens tolerate this lawlessness?
Yeah, I mean, the without bail part of that to me is the most harrowing and frankly just the most blood boiling. I mean, these stories, Rita, frankly, more than any other subcategory of stories that I discuss with you or on my own show, I mean, they make my blood boil, frankly. I mean, just watching this utter desecration of the rule of law, this lack of respect, this cultural dereliction of duty when it comes to respect for law enforcement, the men and women who back the blue. Now, New York State in particular had this horrific bail reform law going back 3 to 4 years ago or so. It's not exactly a new law there, but and they've tried to pare it back on the margins, is my understanding, but it continues to pay horrific dividends for the people of New York City, both civilians and law enforcement alike. And more generally speaking, what you're seeing play out time and time again, I mean, smash and grab has kind of become the new theme in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, and many of these Soros DA cities in particular. New York City, of course, with Alvin Bragg there in Manhattan, is a Soros prosecutor city. So you're seeing a theme emerge here where Soros prosecutors are responsible for prosecuting, or as the case may be, not prosecuting crimes. You're seeing criminals and people who are inclined to do very bad deeds to both civilians and law enforcement alike. You're seeing them just get away with it. I mean, people respond to incentives at the end of the day, and this general kind of tenor, this tone that the left and the Democratic Party in America have reduced to, this utter degradation, this disrespect for law enforcement, this culture of anarchy and lawlessness, of fetishizing crime and criminals, and holding the people that are the victims of crime, the victims of illegal immigration, saying that they are the people that are actually wrong. I mean, up is down, down is up. It's just a total reversal of all that is good, true, and beautiful. And it's been really sad from afar for me in Florida to watch some of these big blue cities fall to this state. You know, in a situation like New York City, I have family there, and I kind of just worry for them, frankly.
Oh, it's sad watching from afar as Australia, because you visit these places and you can see the change within a very short period of time, particularly LA, San Francisco, New York, the decay. And there was once where you'd visit these cities and go, I'd like to live here. No more. I have absolutely zero desire to reside in any of those places. Now, we've heard a lot in recent days about how a Hawaii official reportedly delayed releasing water critical to battling the devastating Maui wildfires. Now, his name is Kaleo Manuel. He's got a lot of attention. He's a former deputy director of the Hawaii Commission on Water Resource Management. And reportedly, he delayed releasing water for over 5 hours as the blaze raged, killing, well, we don't even know how many have been killed in this devastation. Let's hear about this philosophy behind water equity and revering water. This is a clip from last year.
We've become used to looking at water as like something which we use and not necessarily something that we revere as that thing that gives us life. Let water connect us and not divide us. Like we can share it, but it requires true conversations about equity.
Josh, will there be a thorough investigation into the response to these devastating fires, including the lack of preparation, the lack of land management, fire breaks, cutting away native grasses, and all the other factors that fueled the intensity of these fires?
Well, first of all, I mean, what happened in Hawaii is this is tragic stuff, Rita. I mean, this is one of the worst natural disasters in the United States in recent memory. And I say that as someone, I was actually living in Houston, Texas in 2017 when Hurricane Harvey, which is really one of those catastrophic hurricanes to make U.S. landfall in the past half century. I was living there at the time and just watching what Hawaii is suffering from afar. You know, I'm not going to compare the two, but it is at least on that level, if not worse. Over 100 people have died. That death toll number is almost assuredly tragically going to skyrocket because hundreds and hundreds are still missing. The whole town just utterly destroyed. And you watch videos like this, and obviously you have to ask, is this the reason? I mean, can you draw a cause and effect conclusion, a causal relationship from A to B? The answer is it's very difficult to tell. I mean, there were a lot of different factors involved here. You know, we don't know. We think that the spark that caused the fire probably came from a power line that was struck down by these hurricane force winds. The energy company was told repeatedly in the lead up to this to de-energize the lines, to sap the power from the lines. They failed to do so. They are now being sued in a private capacity. Then you throw this, you know, this idiot, for lack of a better term, you throw that into the mix. And it just looks like a horrible, horrible situation from top to bottom. As far as accountability for this individual, it's kind of hard for me to see where that would come from. Hawaii is a very Democratic stronghold, a far left, a very blue state. It's unclear to me what kind of action the attorney general and governor there might take. At the federal level, Hawaii would fall under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, which is a historically liberal court. If litigation, the federal courts were to somehow reach there, the U.S. attorney for the Ninth Circuit out there for Hawaii, I'm pretty sure is a liberal guy, Joe Biden appointee. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's hard to see exactly where accountability would come from. Unless kind of the families of the victims themselves maybe would just really tear up the heartstrings and make such a concerted public appeal. But because I think there's so many different possible causes here to this whole mess, it's hard to kind of pinpoint one. I fear that this guy might get off the hook a little too easily, unfortunately, because that really is just terrible stuff that we just watched.
Now, the president has been shamed into finally visiting Maui. He's taken a break from his week-long holiday to visit the devastation. So that is something I guess we can be happy about. It's taken some time. But just on what you were saying there, Josh, NBC reports that wildfire experts in Hawaii have been warning for years that overgrown grasses were putting communities at extreme risk for wildfire destruction, but officials just simply failed to fund the work or introduce policies to reduce the danger. Michael Walker, Hawaii's fire protection forester, urged state lawmakers last year to make what is a very small investment, $1.5 million for this fire preparedness, but the money was not forthcoming. So things like fire breaks, livestock grazing and water infrastructure for firefighters, well, it just did not happen. Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Rita.
Joining me to give us the latest on the Royals is commentator and host of the To Die For Daily podcast, Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, an aspect of their life that doesn't seem to be going perfectly to plan is their connection to the A-list. We've seen them fall out with high-profile friends or fail to ingratiate themselves with other high-profile types that they invited to their wedding despite not even knowing them. The fallout with Posh and Bex most recently got some headlines. Are this couple just too much hard work? Why are they losing friends?
Well, really quickly, I just wanted to say to your point about them being in Los Angeles and them constantly being in the headlines. Why aren't they in the headlines for doing good, Rita? Yesterday we had a hurricane and we had an earthquake hit us. And, you know, statistically, it's veterans that are living on the streets. Why did Archwell not step up? And why aren't we hearing about Harry and Meghan helping out hurricane victims in their own town or helping out the homeless in their own town? But talking about celebrities, Beyonce, Courtney Cox, I'm sure that they were just appalled when Meghan read word for word Beyonce's private text message to her in the Netflix special. Courtney Cox opening Harry's book Spare, finding out he's talking about drug use at her house, her thinking that this was a private matter. So I think that people are distancing themselves because Harry and Meghan, you know, loose lips sink ships, clearly. Serena Williams, I don't know if you noticed, Meghan was not at either one of her baby showers over the last few weeks. Tyler Perry wished Princess Meghan a happy birthday on Twitter last year or the year before. No happy birthday to Meghan this year on Twitter. And one thing I've not seen anybody mention is Jamila Jamil, who loves to insert herself in any and all drama. She's an actress and a host from the UK. Yes. She did not come out fighting for Meghan when the UTA chief, Jeremy Zimmer, said that Meghan had no talent. And Jamila Jamil was one of the only celebrities there to promote her podcast when he said that.
Well, Jamila Jamil's got her own issues. Some of the stories she has told over the years have been debunked rather spectacularly. So, yeah, I think she'd actually fit in very nicely with Harry and Meghan, because they also do that. Now, there was also a report in The Sun about the different ways these two want to raise their kids. You talked about how Harry wants to be more private and Meghan enjoys the spotlight. And that also is playing into how the kids are raised. The report was also interesting because it pointed out what I see as a complete delusion on Meghan's case. She said that if Archie were in school in the UK, she'd never be able to do a school pickup or drop off without it being a royal photo call with a press pen of 40 people snapping pictures. This is what Meghan said. She said, "Sorry, I have a problem with that. That doesn't make me obsessed with privacy. That makes me a strong and good parent protecting my child." But Kinsey, this is where the delusion comes in, because I'm pretty sure there's not 40 paparazzi snapping pictures of Prince George or Princess Charlotte or Prince Louis as they're being dropped off at their various schools. And, you know, there we're talking about actually a future king, not minor royals.
Yes, I would bet Harry and Meghan an entire case of Elizabeth Arden cream that those photos of Prince George and Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis do not exist, okay? What a bizarre thing to say, but it's one of those things you can say and you can get away with it because Americans are so dumb. I mean, I'm one, I know, that they're not gonna fact check. So there are some people that opened up that magazine, read that and said, "Oh, how horrible, I agree with her." But the reality is that's not the case. But yes, you're right. This Sun article says Meghan wants to be out and about with the kids, wants to make them a part of the Meghan Inc., the Meghan show. Maybe that means appearing on Instagram. What DIY, their favorite snacks. Here are the discount clothes I found for Archie. I don't know what that looks like to her, but it's Prince Harry that wants to keep them completely out of the spotlight. And, you know, I think that is going to be a bone of contention between the two of them because he, according to him, had a traumatic upbringing, and Meghan has thrust herself out there, has worked so hard for fame that she wants to take advantage of this opportunity.
Well, she does. I mean, she was an actress. She was on Deal or No Deal, opening briefcases full of money. I mean, this is the life she chose for herself. So to now ask her to be a recluse, I think, is really going against who she is as a person. But you did trigger me there with your mention of Elizabeth Arden cream. I mean, please. No, because as soon as you say that product has been ruined for generations now, because we hear it and we think of Harry and his Todger. And how many references was there to his Todger in his book? Way too many. In fact, you know what? I'm going to get one of the producers to read the entire book and highlight every reference to Harry's penis and different things he calls it and see what sort of account we get. Kinsey Schofield,
I'm so sorry.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Great to see you.
I accept your apology. Joining me now is comedian and host of Prime Time with Alex Stein on Blaze TV, the incorrigible Texan himself. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Let's start with the border crisis. Millions have crossed the southern border illegally during Biden's term in the White House, more than 2 million a year. And of course, those enormous numbers are naturally going to include some criminals. Earlier this month, we learned that on a single day, Border Patrol agents stopped 4 sex offenders, and we're talking here about criminals with convictions, including crimes against children, 4 caught in one day attempting to cross into the US illegally. How is the border crisis, the fact that you have literally millions crossing illegally, not a bigger issue in the US?
Well, Rita, it's a huge issue. It's happening here. I'm in Dallas, Texas, and we're really affected by it. And where it's really bad is the drugs that are coming through and the sex trafficking. And, you know, people don't want to talk about it. These people they're funded by the cartel, which is the most illegal organization in the world. And they actually use coyotes to bring children across our border. That they're basically pawns in a huge drug and sex trafficking scheme. So it's incredibly terrible. And there's a two-tier justice system, because when these illegal immigrants get arrested here in America, they don't face the same sort of criminal justice that I would face. As a matter of fact, they get flown back to their home country and don't have to face any sort of punishment. And they know that. They're not dumb. So if they can come to America and sell drugs or, you know, profit off illegal prostitution of children, they know that they're not going to face any repercussions for their actions.
Well, this is what shocks me. It is, of course, a huge issue. Even in cities like New York, it's causing a problem because illegal immigrants are being bussed in there, so they're having to carry a little bit of the weight. But it's not leading the news at night. It's not front page news, and it should be, because this is an ongoing crisis. It's worth noting that on top of the 2.4 million who were encountered crossing illegally in 2022, there were more than 600,000 getaways on top of that. And again, these are just the observed illegal crossings. Now let's move along to Republican Larry Elder. He schooled a hypocrite from the left. He appeared on the Breakfast Club with Charlemagne the God, who had the nerve to question Elder's blackness and whether he needed a wake-up call. Let's have a look at some of the interaction.
Have you ever heard of the term wake-up call?
No.
It is an incident where a person of color forgets that they are of color and are reminded rather brutally by an unexpected act of racism. Have you ever had any of those?
Oh, brother. Joe Biden insulted you by saying, you ain't really black. We don't know whether or not you want to vote for me or vote for Donald Trump. How dare this guy come in here and insult you, a black man, and tell you you got to think a certain kind of way? I'm amazed that you weren't mad about that. That should have been a wake-up call on your part, to have a white guy come in here who also said, by the way, gonna put y'all back in chains. And Joe Biden has lied for decades about his civil rights record, claiming that he desegregated movie theaters and restaurants in Wilmington, Delaware, when he didn't do any of that. He lied and said that he tried to visit Nelson Mandela during apartheid South Africa. It seemed to me that should have been a wake-up call for you, but it wasn't.
Alex, your reaction to that?
Well, I'm lucky enough to call Larry Elder a friend, and Larry has a great approach when it comes to this. Sadly, here in America, what we do is we encourage people to play the victim. Larry Elder will never play the victim, and hopefully he can shape some young men and teach them that playing the victim is not the way that we should live our lives here in America. And of course, there's marginalized communities. Of course, you know, racism, you know, is a thing that happens. But Larry Elder, you know, preaches that we need to rise above it. And with that just small interaction, he woke up Charlemagne to the real reality that Joe Biden does not care about black people. If he really cared about black people, he'd be helping them, but he doesn't help them at all. And he lies about the help that he does supposedly give them. So, you know, what happens here in America is that the left uses African Americans as a pawn in their political scheme and doesn't actually help them. And, you know, Larry Elder is based in reality. Unlike Charlemagne, who's uneducated and doesn't know a quarter or, you know, 1/8 of what Larry Elder knows when it comes to, you know, civil rights and civil liberties being trampled on.
And I don't recall Charlemagne making much of a fuss when Larry Elder faced the most horrendous racist abuse from the left when he was having his run in California. There was a woman in a gorilla mask who accosted him as he was walking in the street. Just blatantly racist, ugly attacks. And where were all the folks who are so sensitive to racial issues? They were nowhere to be found, Alex. It really was quite appalling. But I want to bring to your attention something entirely different, a piece in CNN which claims that Republicans are masters of verbal JiuJitsu. They had a report that said Republicans are masters of verbal JiuJitsu. It's a form of linguistic combat in which the practitioner takes a political phrase or concept popularized by their opponent and gradually turns it into an unusable slur. Like the Japanese martial art known as jiu-jitsu, its devotees avoid taking opposing arguments head on and instead redirect their opponent's momentum to beat them. Alex, isn't there a simpler explanation? Don't these phrases become massive jokes because the ideology behind them is just so vacuous and meaningless? After all, it was the left who called themselves social justice warriors. They called themselves woke. They pushed things like critical race theory as something to aspire to. But it's the failure of these words and concepts isn't down to the Republicans playing word games, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, in the term woke it has become a derogatory word, but it should be because it basically is, like you said, it's encouraging an ideology that is not, well, what everybody wants. I know that sounds weird, but I think the dictionary definition of woke is somebody that is speaking out against social injustices. But when in reality, these people are just creating more social injustice. It's like affirmative action, getting rid of it. When you judge everything by sex, race, that is actually racist. So their woke ideology is being turned against them, and they don't have a way to combat it or argue against it because they know how absurd it has become. I mean, you can literally you can go to Google and you can type in, can a man get pregnant? And it says yes. And that is the dictionary definition of woke ideology, when in reality, only a woman can get pregnant. And that's what we're fighting against. Reality and, obviously, I don't even know what to describe, but fairy tales. And I think reality will always win against the woke ideology, fairy tale existence that they want to try to, perpetuate.
Well, I think CNN is engaging in a projection here. This is gaslighting, projection, what do you want to call it, because it's the left who give their projects, give their agenda nice sounding names. Affirmative action you just mentioned there. I mean, you could just call it racism, you could call it discrimination, race-based discrimination, but no, they give it a positive sounding name you couldn't possibly disagree with when the reality is actually quite ugly. And then they call things like Florida's parental rights bill, don't say gay, which bears no relation to the actual bill, does not appear in the bill, but that's what the media call it, Alex. So they're the ones who are creating these linguistic JiuJitsu, if you want to call it, and running with it, and yet they're accusing their opponents of being guilty of that crime.
It's projection, Rita. It's the dictionary definition of projecting. They project exactly what they're doing. And it's from Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, is you accuse your opponent of what you're actually doing to throw your opponent off. So this is a game plan that they've had in place for a long time. And sadly, I hate to admit it, I think the left is winning with a lot of their, their narrative is kind of winning in America. People are waking up to it, but because of social justice and people don't want to be rude to marginalized communities, they just go with the flow instead of speaking out.
Alex Stein, thank you so much for joining me. And next time I'm going to play some of your work, because I hear you are raising money for that airline lady, the one with the meltdown. What? I do not understand what you're up to.
You'll see the video, but we want her to fly private. Rita, we want her to fly private. I don't even know why she's so iconic, but yes, you're going to love this video. You should have saw some of the reactions that we got from people. And of course, she's a joke, but in this world, I've become clown pilled. I think we have to lampoon against the people that are lampooning against us, Rita.
I cannot wait for that vision. I will bring it here. But yeah, of all the things you could be raising money for a private jet for that woman is well, only Alex Stein would do that. Thank you for your time today, Alex.
Thank you, Rita.
And thank you for your company. I'll see you Friday for the Rita Panahi Show and Sunday mornings for Outsiders.